We are not addicted to sugar. We are addicted to energy-dense food, which means food rich in both in sugar and in fat. 1 cup of strawberry, 50 calories. But if we take a strawberry shake, it's 10 times more, 500 kilocalories. It is simply a coping mechanism that attempts to suppress the emotional discomfort we experience. Majority of these diseases are the effects of nothing else but what we eat, how we and how much we exercise, and how we respond to stress.
An accomplished expert on physiology, nutrition, and food technology with 20 years of experience as a scientist and a lecturer, and the founder of Equiliberty Consulting. Our guest today on the Settle or Be Better podcast is Dr. Katarina Meltzer, who's going to be talking to us about obesity, the root causes, and the emotional and mental aspects involved in it. So, welcome, Dr. Katarina, and over to you. Why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about your work and your personal health and wellness story?
Hello, and thank you for your invitation. We are probably interested in excessive body weight. That is the major public health concern in nowadays. The excessive body weight is in fact the leading cause of disability worldwide nowadays, and statistics are simply staggering. As we speak, every second person in the world is overweight, and more than 50% of the world's obese are living in 10 countries, first 5, the States, China, India, Russia, and Brazil. And although for a long time undernutrition was the biggest public health concern, nowadays people are obese, more obese in fact, than underweight. And why? The worldwide hunger rate has fallen in the last 25 years, but no country, literally no country to date, has ever successfully reversed growth of obesity once it has been allowed to develop. And of course, as a consequence, some new diseases emerged, which probably your and my great grandmothers and fathers never heard about. And these are now so-called chronic diseases. But 5 of them are now responsible for 80% of disabilities worldwide. There are mainly cardiovascular diseases, cancer, chronic respiratory diseases, diabetes, and mental illnesses. But what is interesting, and this is that a majority of these diseases are the effects of nothing else but what we eat, how we and how much we exercise, and how we respond to stress. As simple as that. So our modern, speedy, stressful, but effortless life, free from physical exertion and abundant in highly processed and energy-dense food has come with a high price tag.
Understood. And you also talk about how it's not an issue of prejudice of fashion, but it is a scientific reality, right? When we talk about obesity or being overweight. So can you just shed some light on that?
Well, the weight, as I just said, is currently one of the most important public health issues, definitely. One of the major health problems we currently observe are primarily rooted in the excessive, unnatural, and the uniform energy intake. In the long history of our human species, the food was directly related to the environment, to the local climate, to the geography, and varied so widely that no universal nutritional approach would satisfy the needs of all. For example, the Inuit people, they base their diet almost entirely on raw fish and meat. Some African tribes lived on milk, meat, and blood, for example, while others were agricultural and survived on sweet potatoes, on corn, on beans, bananas, insects. The Australian Aborigines limited their food almost entirely on animal life, while those from Peruvian Andes relied on fish, on tropical fruits and vegetables. Dairy products and fruits were largely unknown to the Scottish fishermen, who enjoyed pretty much seafood, oat porridge, cakes. So fresh, natural, seasonal, diverse food. But today, less than 10% of our diet is coming from fruits and vegetables, and up to 80% of diet is in the form of ultra-processed food that are by definition in food technology low-quality, energy-dense food, high in free sugars, sodium and fat, and low in protein, fiber, minerals, and vitamins that contain little or no food. So in fact, food that supply a lot of energy, but very little of anything else. And how is this all made? Well, first of all, as you know, ingredients are dehydrated to prevent them from spoiling, and this makes them even more energy dense. And in order to make them more palatable, then the whole wheat is, for example, turned into white flour, the brown rice into white rice, eliminating almost 50 to 96% of the fiber, vitamin, and mineral content. And then enormous amounts of sugar or fat are added to make products even tastier, further increasing the energy content of already energy-dense food. And finally, our food gets seasoned with tons of additives and preservatives, not in order to ensure the longest and healthiest life of us customer, but the longest shelf life in some blind store supermarket. And the food industry doesn't stop there. In order to deliberately encourage overconsumption, they started to supersize their food and beverages, although they know, but ignore the fact that people presented with large portion sizes tend to overdose, which means they end up eating unintentionally up to 30% more than they would otherwise eat. So as far as nutrition is concerned, the major health problems we currently observe are primarily rooted in excessive caloric intake, excessive energy intake. And at the same time, we have inadequate intakes of vitamin and antioxidant-rich fruits and vegetables and fiber. And this sort of diet that is based on quantity rather than quality has brought a new creature onto the world stage, a human being that manages somehow not only to be overfed, but to be malnourished. Two characteristics that are seldom found simultaneously in the same body in the long, long natural history of our species.
True, that was really well explained. Thank you for that. And since we are on the topic of nutrition, it can be very confusing and very misleading currently for people out there navigating their way through health and well being, because there are just so many polarizing and opposing views on nutrition and so many of these new ways of eating, right? So, today, what happens is if you go on the internet and you look for something, you will find the research backing it up. So, whether it is advantages or disadvantages, you will find research backing both of these things up, which is why it gets quite misleading for people. And at the end of the day, with the decision fatigue, they end up just not taking any particular decision at all, and continuing with the way that they have been for the years, right? So what would you say is a good start for us to approach a nutrition? Of course, there's so many factors to consider, but what are the beliefs that you have when it comes to nutrition, and some actionables that we can start with?
But as I said, one of the major health problems are rooted in excessive caloric intake. But if we would say that this is the only problem, we would fall into this diet centrism, which means the naive tendency of both researchers and the public to attribute a wide range of negative health outcomes exclusively and to dietary factors, in fact, while neglecting other factors that are equally important, mainly a physiological factor, which means the physical activity level and exercise, and a psychosocial factor that regulates our emotions, our stress, our motivation, our self-regulation, our impulse control. In fact, the psychosocial factor modulates to major extent our eating and our physical activity behavior.
Right. Absolutely. And can you touch up a little bit more on the psychosocial factor? How can we become more aware of this, and how can we, change some things that we might not be doing already in terms of that?
Well, we are biopsycho creatures, so biopsychosocial creatures, which means that our biology and our physiology is inseparable from our mind and from our social relationships. And despite the fact that science showed the unity of body and mind, Western medicine practice and educational system are still failing in establishing holistic approach toward health and separates them into two. It's not only that they separate emotions from physiology, they also separate the individual from the environment, from the class, gender, economic status, race, that are well-established social determinants of health. So how do our emotions influence our health or our relationship to food? The brain is, in fact, a dynamic social organ shaped by life experiences, especially in childhood, in which period, in fact, the brain is developing most. So the more traumatic events in life we experience, the more underdeveloped our brain is. Simply, our brain circuits that regulate the emotions, stress, motivation, self-regulation, impulse control, social relationships are not appropriately developed. As Gabor Mate, a leading trauma expert today, say, the brain responds to the pain of life. And one of the first researchers who realized that overeating, in fact, is a coping mechanism that attempts to suppress the emotional discomfort that we experience was Dr. Feletti, Dr. Vincent Felitti, who performed the ACE study, Adverse Child Experiences study, involving more than around 70,000 middle-class adults. And he clearly recognized that the negative life experiences in childhood that are lost in time and then further protected by shame, secrecy, social taboos, play out powerfully and proportionally, even some 50 years, a half a century later, in terms of emotional state, obesity, diseases, and also life expectancy. So in 1985, a young woman, 28 years old, came into his obesity program weighing 185 kilograms. And she asked Dr. Felitti if he could help her with her problem. And in less than a year, she lost 125 kilos. She maintained her body weight for several weeks, but then in 1 3-week period, she regained first 15 kilograms, and later on regained almost all of her lost weight. And Dr. Felitti asked her why the extreme response. She revealed that this was triggered, in fact, by being sexually propositioned at work by a much older man. And after initially claiming not to have any understanding of why this extreme response, she ultimately told him of a lengthy incest with her grandfather from age 10 to age 21. So ultimately, every second person in this obesity program acknowledged the history of sexual childhood abuse. And obviously, this was not the only reason, but this is where Dr. Felitti began studying the factors that may be correlated with our excessive food intake and eventually obesity. So he further studies around the 10 factors because of their prevalence in the weight program. This was not only sexual abuse, but physical abuse, emotional abuse, either humiliation or threats, neglect, physical or emotional, household dysfunction, a member chronically either depressed or suicidal, mentally ill, or in the psychiatric hospital. Then growing up in a home without both biological parents, growing up in a home where one of the members of the family was either an alcoholic or a drug user, mother that was beaten, or a member that was imprisoned. And in the middle class population, 1 in 11 people in his obesity program has experienced not 1 or 2, but 6 or more of these adverse life experiences in childhood or in adolescent age. So this is very common, totally unrecognized experiences, but hidden, as I said, by time, by shame, by secrecy, by social taboos against exploring certain areas of life experience. And many other studies later on studied the effect of trauma and stress on human brain and showed that negative life experiences result in, for example, fewer dopamine receptors. Without dopamine, we are lifeless, we are inert, we lack vigor, we have no motivation to do anything. So dopamine puts us in motion. It is involved in getting more of the things that we do not already have. So it reinforces the rewarding properties of food. We need more food simply to stimulate the brain's underdeveloping function of dopamine circuits. So this is where the addiction to food take root. When we say we are addicted to food, it's not the food that we are addicted to, but to our relationship to it. It is dopamine that is released in our brain through that activity that we are addicted to. But regardless of the activity or of the substance that we are using, this can be food, it can be also alcohol, it can be smoking, internet, shopping, sex. So self-regulation and impulse regulation is also distorted in the stressed or traumatized brain. So there is a lack of control over eating. Brain is simply incapable of saying, no, this is not a good idea, stop, do not eat that much, it's enough. Addictive brain knows that this is not a good idea, but continues with repeated consumption of food. There are also other factors, chronic stresses, for example, that result in neural and emotional dysregulation. For example, cortisol increases appetite and shifts food preferences to so-called comfort food that is high fat and added sugar. So when we crave food, we are usually referring to sweet food, when probably you would like to calm down and to feel better. You usually say, oh, I would need some chocolate, isn't it?
Right.
So this is what we say, I have a sweet tooth. I adore chocolate. But this is in fact incorrect. We are not addicted to sugar, particularly. We are addicted to energy-dense food, which means food rich in both, in sugar and in fat. So, for example, if we want to take something sweet, we can take 1 tablespoon of honey, for example. But no, we take chocolate that contains 30, 40, or 60% fat. A cup of strawberry, it's nice to have. Yes, it's sugar, but we prefer having a strawberry shake that contains 35% of fat. Or, for example, we can also take an apple, but we prefer an apple pie that contains 20 to 30% fat. And you will agree with me that somehow with a vanilla ice cream scoop on top would be even better. And vanilla ice cream has 50% fat. So we do not have obesity epidemic in our country. We have a stress epidemic in our country. And of course, food companies know very well how to explore it.
Absolutely. That was a great insight. I mean, I've almost never heard anyone talk about this in so much detail. And this really highlights some major concerns that, we should be putting our focus on. When it comes to obesity, we very blindly start blaming our genetics or, our lifestyle or our jobs, for having this. But it's very rare that we consider our emotions or our background of trauma and experiences having an impact on this, because we have, like you said, buried it deep down somewhere, and this is how it is coming out in our lifestyle with our eating habits, and it is affecting us in that kind of a way, right? So that was a great insight. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure a lot of people might be, resonating with this. So that's a great insight. And how do you think can we start to address this issue? How can we become more aware and work on this to get better results?
Well, first of all is education or knowledge acquisition. In nutrition and physiology, this is the first and the essential step in becoming simply more aware of how body regulates weight through energy input, through food, and through energy output, through movement. But this is not the only step. If we want to prevent unhealthy body weight gain, successfully, and of course on a long-term basis, and not to have yo-yo effects, we should not only teach people not to eat junk food and to exercise more, but we should accompany them in better understanding the hidden forces behind their unhealthy behavior. What is pulling them into eating this junk, artificial, energy-dense food programmed to be addictive? What is making them so passive, inactive, so too tired or not motivated to move, to exercise, to dance, run in the forest, to bike, chase the kids in the field? What is lacking in their life so that they feel so empty, so detached from their own feelings and emotions, so stressed, so empty, and with no energy for any action? So this is the second step, deep understanding of our behavior. Here we are talking about the consciousness. So on a long run, the journey toward healing and health is growth process. It begins with knowledge acquisition, with the awareness. It completes through its deep understanding, consciousness, and its constant application, action. Why don't we do this? It seems to be pretty simply everything that I explained, but it's not easy. And why it is not easy? Simply, it is too painful. We are ashamed of acknowledging our pain, admitting our dysfunction. So we are in denial, refusing to admit the truth or reality of something that is unpleasant, that is painful for us. And this is normal. This is protective, defensive mechanism from our part. From whom are we protecting us? But from the world we are currently living in. Why? Because we are a society that denies the pain. The world in which we are living trades equality for inequality, connection for separation, closeness for loneliness. We are living in an environment where our sense of unity is simply under assault, largely forgotten or unrecognized. The world that is proclaimed to be the loneliest that has ever existed. And it's not by accident that even suicidal rates increased more than 30% in the last 2 years. We are currently experiencing one death by suicide every 11 minutes. So that world of false stardom teaches us to suppress our feelings. So we tend to become depressed. Under extreme tensions and with no one to share it with, we tend to become hypertensive. Living life with a lack of ease made many of us obese and diseased chronically.
Understood. That was really well explained, and it's very insightful for our audience, I'm sure, and it gives us a greater understanding about this whole issue that we are facing as a community, because every single person in their family has someone or the other, being overweight, or even for years, someone who hasn't been able to address this issue for years for some or the other reason, who have been struggling with this. So I'm sure that every person listening to this might resonate with this in some or the other way. And talking about how a modern society is characterized by chronic disbalance between energy intake and expenditure, right? So how did we come here, and how can we understand this?
Well, I think it is important, if you're talking about the energy balance regulation, to not only discuss the energy intake, which means nutrition, where it is absolutely clear that is not a certain percentage of macronutrients that are posing problems, but the overall caloric intake. You will absolutely agree with me that there are so many diets right now out there. If we go to Amazon, for example, and if we type diet books, we will have around 50,000 results. But none of these results work, because as we can see, every second person that walks on this planet is either overweight or obese. So the first a part of this balance or balance scale, it's energy intake. And it is absolutely enough right now to say that we should focus on eating a real food, but not energy dense food. It's a number of calories that counts, but not the percentage of carbohydrates, protein, or fat. But at the same time, we are having a problem of doing not enough physical activity or exercise. And I heard several weeks ago on one pretty famous podcast an expert who on the question whether exercise can help us in body weight regulation or actually in losing weight, he replied no. So this was the sentence somehow and the main news of that day. We shouldn't confuse people. In order to reach this energy balance, we have to try to eat wisely, but at the same time to exercise. And high levels of physical activity performed on prolonged basis indeed decrease body weight. But there are several factors that should be considered. First of all, the physical activity cannot outweigh the diet if the diet is energy dense, if it's concentrated in energy. And this is what we are right now in this moment consuming. 80% of our diet is in the form of junk energy dense food. If we take, for example, let us take the same example. 1 tablespoon of honey gives us 50 kilocalories. But if you take a table of chocolate, we would ingest 500 kilocalories. 1 cup of strawberry, again, 50 calories. But if you take a strawberry shake, it's 10 times more, 500 kilocalories. If you take a medium apple of 50 kilocalories, but instead of apple, we choose to take apple pie, it's 10 times more, 500 kilocalories. So if we would now put all of this together and say, okay, I will take a cup of strawberries, then I will cut into pieces 1 nice apple, and then have some additional 1 tablespoon of honey on top, we would ingest approximately 150 kilocalories. But instead of this nice fruit salad, if we would take a chocolate and a strawberry shaker and apple pie, we are ingesting 1,500 kilocalories. If I convert this in how much we have to exercise in order to expend this amount of energy for example, a person that is 60, 65 kilograms and performs a moderate walking of 5 METs, which is 5 metabolic equivalents, where we are expending 5 times more than our basic metabolic rate. This is in short, moderate walking. For 1 bowl of fresh fruit, we would need some maybe 30 minutes of walking to expend approximately 150 kilocalories. But for the chocolate with strawberry cake and the apple pie, we would need 5 hours of walking. So energy intake is extremely important, and what we are eating, if there is a fresh, seasonal, real food, as I say, then of course, on the other side, on top of this, then we add physical activity. Of course, it can help us and assist us in body weight regulation. Then someone would ask, then how much do I have to exercise on a daily basis? First of all, in order to have exercise, even as a solo tool for body weight regulation, which means even if you eat real, fresh, seasonal food, but we eat as much as we want, in fact, then we would need a minimum 2 to 3 hours of moderate to vigorous physical activity per day. We performed once one study on more than 70 subjects where they were otherwise healthy students at the Institute of Health, Institute of Sport, eating rather healthy, but then we assigned them in 2 groups. with the physical activity level of 1.7. This is some 60 or so minutes of moderate to vigorous amount of physical activity, or 2 to 3 hours of moderate to vigorous activity. And without do any modifications of food, the group that increased their physical activity on 2 to 3 hours was the only group that lost not only body weight but fat. Percentage of body fat was decreased significantly. So when someone says, yes, I will then add a bit of exercise, there is no bit of exercise, because we are so abundant in food right now that we can eat and find this food on every step of the way. We have to be careful what we are eating. But then if you're talking about physical activity, especially as a solo tool to prevent body weight, then approximately 2 to 3 hours of moderate to vigorous physical activity is needed. There is also one last factor that is rather important in energy balance regulation, and this is the body composition of the subjects. In lean subjects, prolonged increase in energy intake due to exercise is automatically followed by an equivalent increase in energy intake. So if energy turnover is already high, if this person is lean, already sporty, we will see that while he's exercising much more than what we are usually doing, this person is also eating much more. And this is absolutely normal. Otherwise, he would lose his body weight eventually. But in obese individuals, excess energy stores are in the form of adipose tissue mass. So the fat mass acts as an energy buffer, and compensatory responses in intake to altered levels of exercise does not begin to act until the excess energy stores become depleted and the energy homeostasis is at risk. So usually when we start exercising, especially high levels of exercise, as I said, performed on a prolonged basis, then naturally the body will start first using the extra energy stores in the form of body fat mass. And once we decrease our body weight, there is a certain point when the body will sense and say, okay, now I have to start also increasing energy intake in order to match the increased energy expenditure. So no worries, even exercise, if you're eating wisely, can be a solo tool for body weight regulation if performed on high, regular basis. But unfortunately, this does not work in the other direction, which means in sedentary lifestyle. When a person does no physical exercise, the body will simply not recognize that is being overfed and will not compensate the absence of activity with the reduction of food intake. It will just continue, we will just continue eating the same or even more, although we stop exercising. Why? Well, historically, of course, this was an important survival mechanism. Our hunter-gatherers ancestors would use every opportunity to feast and to build up reserves of fat against future famine. But what was the response? This was simply the adaptation in the environment of food scarcity and unpredictability. This, which was absolutely normal in order for us to survive, is simply a disaster in an environment of abundant junk food where the feast never ends. And since our DNA has not changed much in the past 50,000 years, our bodies frantically keep storing fat reserves for times of famine that never come. And at some point, of course, the body starts being oversaturated with stored energy that is not being used for muscle activity. Sugars, fat, and cholesterol accumulate in our organs and blood and starts to cause dysregulation of our hormonal and metabolic system, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases. So overall, if we want to avoid obesity and chronic diseases, we cannot rely on the body to self-regulate, because its energy homeostatic regulation exists only during high energy turnovers. Decrease in energy expenditure due to inactivity sedentarism is not necessarily accompanied by a corresponding decrease in energy intake from food and leads to a positive energy balance, most of which is stored as body fat.
Understood. That was very detailed, and it gives us a great insight into this aspect. And that is true, right? Like today, we are surrounded by abundant food, and the choices that we have, like we have kitchens full of food, and it's not like how ancestors used to face the situation back then, right? Like you said, they used to take up every opportunity to feast because they didn't know when their next meal and where would it come from. But that's not the case today, and we still continue to do the same things even in abundance of food, and this is a vicious cycle that keeps continuing, and we really don't stop to become aware of it and change it in any way. So that gives us a great insight, and essentially here we are talking about energy balance, right? So just to touch up a little bit more on that, is that why are we doing this, how is it going to help us in the long run, and more importantly, how is it going to impact our mental and emotional state?
Attempting to regulate energy balance only through direct changes in lifestyle, energy intake, or expenditure is unlikely to yield any results that are sustainable and in the long term, unless the emotional dynamics driving those behaviors are properly understood and addressed. Overly eating or a lack of exercise is not a problem itself. It's only a marker for other pre-existing problems. It is simply a coping mechanism that attempts to suppress the emotional discomfort we experience, generally because of stress or unresolved trauma suffered earlier in life. In fact, with overeating, we are filling the emptiness from the outside. We're to get a sense of a peace, a sense of control, a sense of calmness, because some qualities are missing from our lives because of the pain. The relationship with our parents, for example, the quality of our current relationship, our degree of loneliness, our job satisfaction, how we relate to work, how we feel about our boss, how boss treats us, our experiences of joy, of anger, any present stresses, or how we feel about ourselves as a person. These unasked questions had everything to do with why most of us had reason to seek medical help. So it is not a primarily problem. I can say it is an attempt to solve the problem, both either overeating or not exercising, for example. You know, we mentioned earlier dopamine. Without dopamine, we are lifeless. We are inert. We lack vigor. We have no motivation to do anything. Dopamine puts us in motion. So in part, dopamine signaling influences the ability to self-initiate actions, as well as willingness and vigor with which these reactions are performed. When it feels impossible to stick to your good intentions and eat more mindfully, it is not because you do not care or you're not trying hard, but simply because we do not feel like it. The problem of emotional control is rooted in a problem of emotional regulation, not only in lack of education or information. So probably you had the opportunity several times, at least for small reasons, to visit a doctor who will always ask what does it hurt? But doctor rarely asks, what is bothering you? Because what hurts us is not what troubles us. Medication can relieve pain, but the cure is found where the pain originates. So allowing ourselves to open up, to talk about our limiting beliefs, to surround ourselves with the right people that will help us, not through correction, but much more through compassion, through companionship, through presence. When we open up, talk about problems, seek for help, this is where the transformation begins. So consciousness is freedom, liberty, to allow ourselves the freedom to be in equilibrium, in equilibrity.
Absolutely amazing. That was very insightful, and this really makes us understand a lot more about the whole emotional aspect involved in what kind of a physical state we are right now currently, and what are the issues that we are facing. Because, like I said, that we don't often get the opportunity to address these or even to become aware of these. So that really gives us a great insight into this. Thank you for sharing that with us. And so my last question would be, that is something that you also talk about, is now we have learned about, like health, and we know some little actionables. We do understand where our behaviors come from. My last concluding question would be that, what are the forces that drive our unhealthy habits that are there for years with us, like that we probably don't even know about. Currently, we haven't pointed out what are those specific habits that are pulling us back from progressing in our life, in our health and well-being, and what is the force that is driving it.
Well, as we said, we can talk or learn a lot about nutrition and physical activity, but if our self belief is I'm not worth it, or I'm not enough, then we have to start with trying to find sources within us that will help to start loving ourselves, to start getting in touch with ourselves and our emotions. Because with overeating, as you said, we are feeling the emptiness from the outside in order to get a sense of peace, a sense of control, a sense of calmness. Because obviously some qualities are missing for our lives, and the pain is there, is unbearable. So we start eating because food is giving us this piece of control of this calmness, this feeling good when we are on our own. So once we address these problems, then we are open up for transformation. We are open up also to eat more wisely when we start, especially exercising. It is proven that immediately our eating habits will be happier, and I think we own this ourselves.
Absolutely. That is a very powerful message that I'm sure our listeners and me also, we can think about and, go ahead from here. And talking about that, what would be some recommendations that, to conclude this whole conversation today, and where do we go from here? We did understand, some root causes and some really common issues that we might be going through in our lives that are affecting our health and well-being in a certain way, and also our approach to it. So where do we go from here? Do you have any recommendations that we can begin with some small steps today?
Well, as I said, if out of 50,000 existing books on Amazon, there is only one single diet that would work, then we wouldn't have this obesity problem. But there is no diet, in fact, that is good or better than the other diet. The food that we have to eat, if it's based on a seasonal, fresh, and real food, in fact, for the person who is doing moderate to physical activity, recommendations of some 30 to 60 minutes per day, etc., no special recommendations are needed. We can talk in maybe some other podcast about the special diet, because any dieting, any nutrition is in fact individuals. It is never a recommendation for the general population. It depends of our activity state. It depends what kind of activity we are performing. It depends of type of activity, of the intensity of the activity, etc., etc. So there we are then maybe modifying the percentage of macronutrients. Otherwise, what I would stack here, because we were mainly focusing on the energy, and this is for the nutrition, eat real food, and for physical activity, do as much as possible, but 2 to 3 hours of moving, moderate to intensive physical activity per day would definitely show big results. Again, none of this is possible if we do not have a right, healthy approach toward us, toward our environment, and toward way of living.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. And it's been a great conversation today, very insightful. I'm sure that our listeners are getting some great understanding of these topics and something that they've probably not heard about before. So thank you for sharing these insights with us. And as we conclude today's episode, do you have any last messages or thoughts to leave us with?
Enjoy life, love yourself, try to simply live the best you can, the way you think it should be, and then everything comes from within. Everything comes with the satisfaction with yourself and your life.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. That was a lovely message. And thank you once again, Dr. Katarina, for being here today with us. And for the ones who'd like to reach out, you can find the details in the description below, and you can go and follow Dr. Katarina and also look out and learn more about Equiliberty Consulting. And if you could just tell us a little bit about that how can we reach out and why should we reach out to Equiliberty Consulting?
Well, I'm nutritionist and physiologist specialized in energy balance regulation, and I'm offering consulting either to the individuals or the group, universities, faculties, etc. You can reach me at Instagram. This is the only profile, public profile that I have, but my main intention is simply to try to spread the message either about nutrition, about food intake, or what are the driving forces of our healthy or unhealthy behavior. And you can follow me at Equiliberty, Katarina Meltzer, or at Equiliberty.
Lovely, lovely. We'll have the links in the description below, so you can definitely reach out and follow right away. Thank you so much once again, Dr. Katarina, for being here. It was an amazing episode, and that's it for today's episode. I am Sakshi Pawar, and I'll be your host for the Settle or Be Better podcast. So stay tuned while we bring more inspiring stories your way. You know the drill. Subscribe to the Settle or Be Better podcast, like, share, and comment on our videos, and hit the bell icon, because you don't want to miss the mind-boggling health discussions we're about to bring for you. Why settle when you can be better?